Chair and Commissioners. This panel will be presenting the work and findings of Working Group 1, the DSPP Markets Committee. So this slide is just a little disclaimer, and I think we heard this earlier, that while this presentation includes input from many sectors and parties, the presentation does not, nor was it intended to represent a consensus view. And I think we also heard from Judge Stein that although this was sort of a fact-finding mission, we quickly realized that there was some overlap between facts and policies and opinions in here, so there is some of that interwoven in here. So I'll quickly go over the agenda. First, I will provide an overview of the committee, its makeup, its objectives, and key findings. Then David Gall from the PACE Energy and Climate Center will cover products and services that may be transacted under the new REV construct. Next, Bill Acker from the New York Battery and Energy Storage Consortium will discuss challenges and pathways to increase distributed energy resources penetration. And just for your information, from here on, I'll probably call that DER, Distributed Energy Resources. Then Bart Franey from National Grid will discuss a potential initial model for REV, including utility roles and regulatory reforms that may be necessary. Next, Molly Lampe from the New York ISO will present the findings of the wholesale markets subgroup. And finally, I will present an overall summary of the committee's efforts and findings. And I also want to acknowledge my two co-conveners of the Markets Committee who are seated at the resource table, Deirdre Altabell from Con Edison and Ann Reynolds from the Alliance of Clean Energy New York.
We need to move that resource table closer. It's like we're putting you in the back 40.
We could do that, you know.
Yeah,
We could just pick it up and move it.
All their hard work and their way over there in the corner. So with respect to the DSPP Markets Committee structure, as illustrated in this picture, there were a number of sectors represented on the committee. I know Judge Stein mentioned some numbers. On our committee alone, we had 180 members representing over 100 organizations. Because of the size of the group, a steering committee was formed with representatives from each of the sectors. And the steering committee was tasked with soliciting and compiling information from all of the members. There were weekly working meetings of the steering committee, as well as weekly reports to and requests for information from the full committee. And there was also a separate subgroup that worked on issues related to the interaction with wholesale markets. Moving on to the scope of the committee. The scope and the objectives of the Market Committee was to identify potential products, services, and transactions between various parties, including but not limited to the DSPP under the new REV construct, to develop information on the value of potential products and services, both to the electric system as well as other societal benefits. The group set out to define challenges and pathways to further proliferation of DER provision of products and services. We also developed recommendations for a potential initial model or procurement structure to facilitate DERs, essentially focusing on the near term or the initial stage of REV. I think you heard a little bit earlier with the Platform Technology Group talking about how they more focused on the end state, and our group sort of looked at the beginning stages and what the first steps would be, generally looking at the first 3 to 5 year time frame. And then finally, the group looked at interactions of the DSPP and other parties with the New York ISO wholesale markets. The following are some of the key takeaways from the efforts of the committee. The committee found that there are numerous potential products and services that DER can provide. Some exist today, but it is expected that new and innovative products will develop in the future. The group wrestled with some definitional issues as they related to potential products or services, such as whether energy or capacity are products that the DSPP would buy. So one takeaway, and I think you also heard this earlier, was that precise definitions will be of great importance under the REV construct. Also, while a number of distributed energy resources exist today as a result of programs and initiatives by the PSC, NYSERDA, utilities, ESCOs, the New York ISO, and others, some of these resources may be underutilized, and more resources may be needed to optimize efficiency and to achieve the goals of REV. However, the committee identified a number of challenges to further proliferation and utilization of DER. Focusing on the near term, the committee suggested an initial stage of REV, whereby the utilities will play a key role in further developing DER. Finally, the committee identified a number of actions that could be taken by utilities, DER providers, and others, as well as potential regulatory reforms and potential need to align New York ISO markets to help facilitate DER development and the achievement of the REV objectives. Are there any questions on that before I turn it over to David?
Questions? No. Well, I have one question, and maybe I think I saw it in the presentation. Was there discussion on the committee about jurisdictional limits? I know with the 745 reversal, maybe Molly, you want to adjust it, but it seems to me that that's at some point we're going to have to address how all this fits within our Federalist framework.
Yes, and you did see it in the presentation, and it will be Molly who is addressing that.
Thanks.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'll turn it over to David Gall.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. I'm David Gall with Pace Energy and Climate Center. Good morning, Commissioner Ziebelman. Move that a little closer. Good morning, Commissioners. So as Tammy said, I help represent the environmental sector on the steering committee with some co-representatives. And my job today is to quickly review the committee's work identifying the distributed energy resource products and services that could be available in this new market. So we're going to go through a lot of material pretty quickly. Oops, excuse me.
Dave,
go back to that.
Tilt your microphone up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
There we go.
better.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, so let's set up the exercise a little bit first, and we'll start with some of the definitions. So the committee broadly defined distributed energy resources, and we have identified a number of categories. The distributed generation, including fuel cells, solar PV, CHP, etc. We had energy storage, demand response, energy efficiency, and microgrids. And as Tammy said at the outset, one of the key findings of the committee was that although we have these categories of DER resources, there are new and innovative resources that we're expecting to come online, and so that we have to be mindful of constructing the REV framework with an eye toward their new resources that will be developed over time. For the actual exercise, we sort of looked at products and services from two perspectives. First, we looked at DER products that would be bought by the distributed system platform provider for the benefit of the distribution system. So that was one exercise that we engaged in. The second exercise that we engaged in was products that would be bought by customers and ESCOs and DER providers, potentially within the framework of the DSPP marketplace, but also potentially outside of that marketplace. So we looked at some of those transactions and some of those products that would be available as well. All right, so what I'm going to do is quickly talk about the first exercise. Again, this is the products that were bought by the distributed system, that would be bought by the distributed system platform provider for the benefit of the system. And so this table, what it does is it walks you through some of the categories of products and services, and then some of the anticipated benefits that those products and services would bring to the system. And so I'll just kind of walk through. On the left-hand side, we have our categories, and our first major category that we identified was base load modifications, which could include local energy production, supply side increases. and then permanent load, shift, and reduction. So my example here is energy efficiency, and we can talk about some of the benefits that energy efficiency brings to the system on the other side of the table. So that's obviously avoided and deferred transmission and distribution investments, that's reduced operating costs, and overall air pollution emissions reductions, which is a key goal of the REV proceeding as well. Let's move on to the second category of the table. It's peak load modifications. So there we're talking about distributed energy resource outputs. That could be offsetting central station generation. Demand response is another category, and flexible capacity ramp rate activities is another piece of that. I'll quickly talk about demand response. Again, some of the same benefits that we have seen. We have improved system stability. We have lower energy and capacity costs as a result of demand response, and ultimately some better utilization of the system. So those are some of the benefits that we had identified on those first two categories. Moving on, we have a couple of other categories of benefits as well. Non-bulk ancillary services was a category, and so this is sort of the grid support section of the products and services that were identified. I'll use just voltage support as an example. Voltage support improves the power quality, and which is important to many customers in New York State. So that's a very important anticipated benefit. Also, another category of products and services that we identified was contingency planning, and that could be black start, emergency power islanding. We talked a little bit about microgrids and the benefits that microgrids could bring to the system, and those are clearly improved resiliency, improved system, bringing the system back online, and then obviously the public health and safety benefits if there are critical services that need to be provided by microgrids as well. So that's another piece. You'll note at the bottom of this slide, there's a little footnote that recognizes a vigorous debate that we had within the committee on whether energy and capacity are products that the distributed system platform provider would buy and what kind of value they bring to the system. As Tammy said at the beginning, I think there were some definitional issues that caused this debate. And at a high level, I think the real question here was how exactly do we handle the value that some of these DER resources bring into the system, and how to account for the value of avoided investment in transmission and distribution infrastructure. So that was a source of debate within the committee, but I think it ultimately speaks to some greater need for precision on some of these terms. One of the other key findings of the committee involved identifying the value of the benefits of DER products. And the notion here is that there are a number of specific conditions that are going to drive the value of those products, including the location of the resource, the nature of the resource, whether it's a zero-emission resource, as in the case of solar, or a fossil generation unit, the time of day that the resource is used, and the committee's finding here is ultimately that all of these factors are going to address the value of that resource and need to be considered going forward. All right, so now let's move on to the second category of the exercise, which was looking at those other transactions, the transactions that would be bought by other customers, either ESCOs or DER providers, potentially within the DSPP marketplace or potentially outside of it through just bilateral transactions. And so what we've done here is we've identified, again, some categories of products and services, and then some specific examples of what those products and services could be. So quickly, we have delivery services, and then the examples of that would be some value-added services, some DG or DER interconnect services. I'll move on to the second category, which was end-use customer services. And a good example of this would be, again, energy efficiency. This could be energy efficiency services that an ESCO provides to a group of clients or a group of customers, and that could potentially happen outside the DSPP model, marketplace, I should say. With pricing and billing services, and there's a whole host of different products available there, but there could be aggregation of transactions that a firm would engage in and bring those aggregated transactions to the DSPP. And then we have metering and information services as well, and that could include post-customer billing data. It could be analysis of that data and further analytic work using some of that information to help provide value to customers. The last thing I'm going to cover quickly will be the funding mechanisms that would support all of these activities and these products. I think that the top two on this slide, bilateral agreements and the DSPP tariffs, are probably the most, will be the funding mechanisms that the committee agreed would be the most likely ones to be used, but we also identified a whole host of other potential funding mechanisms. For instance, the DSPP for those products and services that it would buy and bring to the distribution system, that the tariff structure is probably the way that would be, probably the mechanism that would use to fund those products, the purchase of those products. But there could also be bilateral agreements between third parties as well, as I've mentioned. Just to mention a couple of the other potential funding mechanisms, we have distributed energy resource funding based potentially on the future energy savings from that those resources bring, and then potentially on bill financing as well. And that completes the products and services overview. There's a lot of detailed material in the reports, detailed appendices that describe many of these products in great, excruciating detail for your viewing pleasure. So, take any questions?
First of all, David, thank you. And Tammy, thank you. I don't think we introduced you. This is Tammy Mitchell, who's chief of our electric division. I'm going to, first of all, anyone have any questions to begin with? Just a couple things when I was looking at it. When you talk about your product and services, such as pricing and billing services, was there discussion as to whether or not they could be third-party provided or whether they had to be DSPP? Did you get into debates on what was sort of a must-do versus can-do?
I'll start, maybe, Tammy, if you want to fill in. I think that, yes, there were discussions about which entities would perform those services and whether they would happen within the DSPP marketplace or outside of it. I don't think the committee reached any real consensus on what would be a must-do arrangements versus other kinds of arrangements. And I'll ask you to fill in if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree. I think a lot of the discussion went around the fact that we had a number of parties represented, as we talked about, and there are currently businesses out there that provide some of these services. And I think there was a concern that if we're creating this new DSPP model, regardless of who the DSPP is, are we somehow stepping on the toes of others that may be able to provide those services? So I think there were those that wanted to be able to maintain the ability to provide services, not just billing, but a lot of these different services. And again, as David said, either through the DSPP, directly with customers, directly with the ISO. So. Yeah.
And then I guess if I would get this, sort of making this up on the fly, which is always dangerous, but it seems that there are some products and services that we have to identify that we're going to want the DSPP to provide to animate the market. That would be, I would put in the category of everyone must do. Secondly, though, there's a category of services that we might say that the DSPP has to provide in order to enable the market, so that third parties can come in, but could be non-monopoly type services that third parties can also offer, right?
Right. I agree.
I mean, and then a third, potentially another category could be services that anyone can offer, and we might want the DSPP not to offer in order to ensure a competitive market. That sort of be a potential category that we haven't listed here, but something we should be looking at.
Yes, I agree with that, and in addition to that, I think as time goes on and the model changes, that those decisions that we make now about what the DSPP has to or can provide and what others, can provide, may actually change as well. I think, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about the initial model, but I think there was sort of a recognition that in the beginning, the utilities in particular may need to be more involved in getting the market going and increasing the DER penetration. But as that happens in the future, we may be able to look at a different model, more of a, sort of akin to the New York ISO market model, where maybe the utilities are less involved.
Or maybe even a little bit like we've done with telecom, as we've evolved those services.
Right.
Any follow-up? Good. Thank you. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Ziebenman and Commissioners. I'm Bill Acker with the New York Battery Energy Storage Consortium. I've been asked to talk about the challenges of pathways for increased DER penetration and utilization this morning. And as David just talked about, the working group spent a lot of time talking about products and what the benefits were associated with those products, and that led to discussions about what are the near-term barriers and how can we increase the penetration of DERs in the marketplace. And we all recognize, and I think there certainly is a lot of debate about what the end state of this marketplace looks like from the REV process, but we all recognize that there's a great opportunity to create a transactive energy market out of this process that's truly a competitive market that eventually could have bidirectional flow and prosumers and the ability to unbundle products and services so that you can really take advantage of all of the benefits that these devices and these new technologies offer.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you need to speak a little closer to the microphone?
Speak closer? Okay, sorry. Thank you. Hopefully, people
Maybe
caught most of that.
tip it down a little bit? Or?
Yep. Okay. So,
Much better.
can you hear me now? Good, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. So there is a great opportunity to create a truly transactive energy market in the long run. We also recognize, though, that DER penetration is not currently at the levels that would support all of the visions for a truly transactive market at this point. And so the graph here is showing that we have phases that are occurring where we're building the asset base, which is the phase we're in right now. We need to establish the markets, and then we need to eventually continue to adapt and improve those markets. And of course, we want to move quickly in this, but we also want to make sure that as we establish these markets, we do effectively value the products and services that are involved here. So we do need to identify and remove the challenges of entry, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. We also need to make sure we have the appropriate structures, as I just said. So moving to the next slide. When we look at the challenges and pathways here, a great deal of the challenges associated with the penetration of DERs in the marketplace comes around properly valuing the benefits associated with those products and monetizing those benefits. And I think everyone recognizes that distributed energy resources can create a wide variety of benefits that are not presently valued in the marketplace. These benefits particularly involve location, the level and timing of the system needs that they're offsetting or providing services for, and people need to take into account the resource performance associated with those in valuing them. So as we look at that, there are numerous examples where these DERs can provide a wide variety of benefits at the same time. So an example of an energy storage device, for instance, can be doing load reduction at a site. It also could be putting that energy onto the grid as opposed to doing it behind the meter, and therefore providing energy capacity services, which, as David just pointed out, was a point of contention in the discussions that we had. It also can be performing voltage, VAR support, other very effective things for grid support services, and it also could be performing ramp break services to stabilize and help offset the effects of other DERs and other things on the grid. In order to do this, we need to monetize those multiple benefits. Additionally, these devices will perform other benefits that were listed in the working group report. So in the section on products and services, there's a spreadsheet that was put together that looks for policy benefits and other benefits associated. Those benefits need to be monetized in a way as well as we move forward with this program. Now, in developing structures that provide appropriate pricing signals for services, it's recognized that in the long term, you'd like to have a transactive marketplace that has the market to providing all of these signals that value all of these benefits. It's also recognized that in the near term, the market's not ready to perform all of that. It's also recognized that in many cases, for penetration of DER, multiple benefits do need to be valued. So for instance, if you had a situation where you are valuing a device that's putting out power for VAR support and voltage support, but you're not valuing other components that it can do, they may not be cost effective. So it's important that as we look at the steps that we take in creating this marketplace, we do make sure we take steps that value the multiple benefits of the products. The last point around that is the unbundling aspect of these services and benefits. It was recognized that because there are a lot of services and benefits, frequently they are bundled together, and long-term unbundling them can be particularly valuable. The second large area that was talked about with regard to challenges and pathways is information availability. And we broke this into three categories. The first category is the information about the distribution system's needs and capabilities. Clearly, distributed energy resources can have much more impact locationally on the grid in certain areas than other areas, and the ability to understand that is suggested that this can be built off some existing programs, but the ability to fully understand that, again, eventually that can be market driven, but near term we need to understand that in order to drive the locations of the DERs and understand their benefits. Secondly, DER performance and commitments. A point made by many of the utilities and other people are that in many cases, there's a perception of a lack of information around the performance of the DERs and the commitment to provide the services in order to both effectuate planning and also to ensure that the services are there when you need them. The third area, an informational area, is customer account usage information, which I won't talk to here, but the next group you're going to hear from, the consumer engagement group, will be talking about extensively. But this is an area that, of course, will be valuable in being able to deploy the products. The next broad area of challenges to introduction is involved in the standardization of metering, verification, and reporting requirements. Currently, you can be in a situation where ISO and utility programs differ in such a way that the same event will be treated differently between those. So in having the ability to make sure that we are standardizing, and of course we heard a lot about that a moment ago with regard to techniques to do standards and protocols, but this is more associated with how you're monitoring, how you're metering, how you're verifying, and how you're reporting with respect to the individual performance of the DERs in the programs. Now, the last two areas that I'll touch upon are first technical, which a major barrier to a lot of DER implementation actually are the interconnect rules, the time that it takes to achieve standard interconnection. The number of people talked about reporting wait times, having deadlines, having ways to establish ways to streamline the interconnection rules, and also the coordination between electric, gas, and steam operations, especially as you get into some of the DERs that engage multiple ones of those, to be able to affect the interconnect rules efficiently. Again, establishing monitoring, control, and verification for the installations, and this particularly gets to the ability to integrate DERs into resource planning as we're moving forward, and deployment of communication infrastructure, which I again won't go into because we talked about that extensively in the last panel, but obviously a critical aspect in moving forward. The last area I will talk about is in this general category of other, but it includes quite a bit. The first is addressing costs and financing of DERs. There are a number of suggestions and pathways to be looked at associated with that were put onto the matrix that's in your packet for suggestions that came forward. These included increasing on-bill financing and property tax financing, the work the Green Bank's doing, revenue certainty for financing, so building confidence in the market for the revenue models for these devices. The next area is incentivizing utilities to consider DER alternatives to T&D investments. And this is a situation where occasionally, in fact, maybe frequently, DER resources are not necessarily considered as alternatives to T&D investments. So requiring evaluation of non-transmission alternatives and potentially also looking at the financial incentives to make sure that that utilities are incentivized to consider these devices. We believe it's important that all of the existing programs that are in place continue. As we indicated, the markets don't necessarily take off on day one, and we need to grow the resource base to start with. Revisiting standby rates. Standby rates can be a deterrent to DERs, so this is the tariff structures and cost allocation issues. Clarifying the future of net metering, desire for long-term policies in that regard. It was also pointed out that improved the load-serving entity customer data submission to the ISO to better reflect what the customers are actually doing, so that load-serving entities can get credit for what customer changes behaviors actually occur. Revising the cost-benefit analysis framework to include societal benefits and costs, particularly environmental. And I'll finish up, since I'm out of time here, with the last point of ensuring that that use of the DER maintains reliability of the T&D system. And this is a double-edged sword because obviously DERs can enhance resiliency and can have many benefits in this regard. But we also do have duck curves and other things that we look at that require analysis of how the DER penetrations work and how multiple DERs can maybe offset the effects of other ones and help to create a better system overall. So with that, I will wrap up, and then we can take questions as a group.
One comment / question. You kind of lay out a lot of the challenges, interconnection, standby rates, which I think we all recognize need to be worked on. But while we're overcoming those challenges, I just want to kind of keep in mind some basics. We've mentioned already cybersecurity, that no matter what we do here, we're going to have to keep that in mind. You said more information about the system would be very useful to the providers. Absolutely true. More information about the system can also be very useful to other people as well that perhaps want to threaten the physical security of the system. I had somebody in the audience mention to me earlier, and I think it's a very good point, employee safety has to be maintained by having more and more of these remote sources. We've just got to maintain that safety requirement. And then I think we'll probably get into in the markets, there is concern about privacy of information. So while we take a look at the one set of challenges, which I think is absolutely necessary to do what we're trying to accomplish here, we can't lose sight or gloss over these basic things that have to be maintained while we make those changes. So if If you want to comment, fine, but it's more of a speech than a question.
Right. Well, I will indicate that was discussed. I mean, I think people recognize some of those points you're making.
I would guess that we would add public safety to that mix.
Public
as well.
safety, employee safety, absolutely.
I am curious, and I'm sort of weighing in, I know, on a complex issue. I mean, we're at a point where we're trying to transition from one methodology to incenting distributed resources to integrating it to more of a market environment. And the other piece of this that, you know, the Commission is always concerned about is affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a sense, we're building a bridge. And I think our challenge is going to be is building that bridge in a way so that we end up with more than we have today, not less. But in the meantime, that means some model of change. We can't proceed on both tracks at once, right? And was there any discussion in the group? I'm sure there wasn't consensus, but is discussion on how you know, and I know this is something that Colleen Gerwitz loses sleep about all the time. How do we make that transition without disrupting the market? And that's also maybe more of a speech than a question, but there is a question in there. Was there discussion, debate, a recognition of that? How did you guys talk about that? And that could be to anyone, but...
Right. So maybe I can start, and I'm certainly welcome everyone to chime in here. I think in the limited time that the working group had, and the working group, I think, had an incredible wealth of information and input from many members, and I think it was a great process. But in the limited time the working group had, we began with more of a longer-term vision and then zeroed in on near-term. So you're going to hear some near-term models coming forward here. I think there's still a fair amount of work to be done in how that transition occurs, because it's recognized that the existing programs need to continue for continuity's sake in the marketplace. We can't have market shock associated with this that just stops the whole process as we're going through it. And we also recognize that the end goal is a quite correct one, and that you can get there. So the challenge is going to be to continue the appropriate incentivization programs while we're creating the marketplace that can pick up where the incentivization programs leave off. And I think that's where the jury's still out, and there really wasn't a lot of discussion on how that actually occurs. And maybe that's a discussion that can occur in the near future.
This could be like one of my kids' stories, and then I woke up. Anyone else on this? It's a complex issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, and I think we're looking at this again, looking at the initial stage and how do we get from here to the final stage. And one thing that we recognize is that what we want to do here is to complement and supplement existing markets and programs that we have now. And in doing so, I think although we recognize that we have to monetize some of these values and these benefits of some of these resources, I think we're going to have to give guidance as to what sort of cost-benefit methodology needs to be considered in these programs as we move forward. So I think there is more guidance that's needed, but certainly we don't want to do something that the costs exceed the benefits. So that framework is still, there's still more that needs to be developed that we just couldn't get to in this time.
The other thing that I observed, I mean, you identified it, and I don't know if that was by example or something that the group sort of solidified around this issue of building the asset base as sort of day one. And, you know, it's sort of reminiscent, of course, in the wholesale market, we talked about day one being the energy market and then moved on to ancillaries and other types of things. Was there consensus around that the focal point needs to be in the immediate future, just getting the assets in, or is that sort of by way of example is sort of what should be our focus for the first, I would say, generation of this evolution or transformation?
So I think there was a general agreement that more resources are certainly going to be needed, especially if we want to get to this fully transactive market. you need more resources for more efficiency. But there was also recognition that we've had programs in place. There are a lot of resources out there. They may or may not be used as fully as they could be. The values may not be fully recognized, but certainly there are certain areas of the state where more resources exist. But when you get down to the distribution system and you're looking for alternatives to your traditional T&D investment, you're going to need resources and you're going to need them in those locations. So I really do think you need to grow that resource base so that you have those available as alternatives.
Anyone else? So it'd be, what I'm hearing is it's both and. We have to monetize them, and then we also have to attract them. It's not an either-or, as you see as the first stage. Is that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if we ever actually put that as a point of voted agreement, but I certainly would agree with it.
Art, did you? You're nodding.
I think that a lot of these questions that you're asking are probably going to be addressed in my
Okay.
presentation. So.
All right, good.
Which is next?
Okay, which is next, yeah. Good. Thank you.